McLaren are the second most successful team in Formula 1 history. Only Ferrari have more wins, and they are ahead of the new giants Mercedes and the legendary Williams team. Their legacy will always be remembered for success, but their current form shows just how far they have dropped off from their glory years. As of the Canadian Grand Prix, they stand 6th in the standings on 17 points. But while they are struggling compared to even a couple years ago, completely new technical leadership and huge upcoming upgrades show they have every intention of returning to the podium places. So let's talk McLaren and really pick apart where things have gone wrong and what they are doing to bounce back. So the modern McLaren we know of today really came about when Ron Dennis left the team in 2016 after 29 years in charge and was replaced by American Zak Brown. Since this point, they've made bold decisions and gradually found their way moving up the F1 pecking order. From 2017 to 2020, they went from 9th in the standings to 3rd, becoming a reasonably consistent podium finisher, and even a race winner in 2021 with Daniel Ricciardo. Their trajectory was rapid and very promising, almost causing people to label McLaren as being back to the top of Formula 1. However, their steady and reliable progress was affected when the new aerodynamic regulations came in, throwing a spanner in the works and causing real unpredictability throughout the F1 teams as to how you design a completely new car. And well, McLaren didn't quite hit the mark. The 2022 car was in no way awful, but they definitely took a step back in performance and competitiveness. While they were the only team apart from the big three of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull to take a podium, being Lando's P3 in Imola, they only finished 5th in the standings behind Alpine. And so, moving into 2023, they were desperate to bounce back and almost just forget 2022 ever happened. However, before the 2023 season even started, news broke out that McLaren team principal Andreas Seidel, who was pretty much responsible for their quick rise up the grid the past few years, was leaving and joining Alfa Romeo to oversee the entrance of Audi into Formula 1. While this move is perfect for Seidel as he's worked under the Volkswagen parent company before and is well suited to the culture of the Audi team, it also represented the lack of faith Seidel had in the McLaren team. Nevertheless, McLaren promoted Andreas Stella into the team principal role, who by all means is a good replacement. However, the chaos in leadership truly came through on track, as McLaren started one of their worst seasons to date. They were arguably the slowest team at the first 2 races with a best finish of 15th. However, the next race in Australia did allow them to score good points, mainly because they avoided the chaos of the safety car restart. But since then, they've been inconsistent and generally struggling to break into the top 10. And the reason for this is pretty simple. They weren't prepared for the 2023 season. Before the season even began, Zak Brown, at the launch of the MCL 60, said that they were behind schedule and that they had serious work to do. They essentially hadn't built their new car in time for the start of the season, and so were just using last year's car with some minor tweaks. And so it was no surprise that they were underperforming. And so McLaren needed to do 2 things: bring the upgrades, which basically consisted of an entirely new car, as soon as possible, and then sort out any issues within the team that resulted in these devastating delays. So firstly, to prevent any such delays and mishaps happening on the technical side again, they completely reshuffled the entire technical team only a few races into the 2023 season. Their first action was to remove James Key as technical director, who had been at the team since 2018 and basically oversaw their rise back into a competitive team. And instead of replacing him with a like-for-like technical director, what McLaren have done is completely change the structure of technical leadership in the team. They have essentially changed it so they now have 3 technical directors that are all assigned a specific area of the car. They recently hired Red Bull designer Rob Marshall to be technical director of engineering and design. They poached David Sanchez from Ferrari to be the technical director of car concept and performance. And finally, they've internally promoted Peter Prodromou to be the technical director of aerodynamics. This 3-pronged technical leadership is certainly one that I've not seen before, but it's a good sign that McLaren are making big and bold decisions to return to the top. So they have their technical leadership sorted, which has allowed them to completely focus on bringing new upgrades to the car as soon as possible, and essentially start their 2023 season afresh. And we've already been given some news around when to expect these upgrades. Team principal Andreas Stella came out recently saying that these upgrades are so big and significant that they will be releasing them over 3 races, and that pretty much every single aerodynamic component of the car will be different to their current 2023 car. And so the new upgrades will be released over the next 3 races of Austria, Great Britain and Hungary. Stella has said these upgrades will be noticeable, with changes to the underside of the bodywork reportedly taking the most time to develop. Now, McLaren did bring some upgrades in Baku, however these new upgrades are significant as they mark the first real developments that have come as a result of the reshuffle of technical leadership that I mentioned previously. But even if these upgrades do turn things around for McLaren, to what extent will they really make a difference? The issue McLaren have is that for the first time in many years, there are now 4 teams that are deemed to be consistent podium finishers, being Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and now Aston Martin. So the best they can think of achieving this season despite their upgrades is 5th, which would mean beating Alpine, who do seem to have a pretty strong package, and have shown themselves to be somewhat lonely between the top 4 and back 5 teams of the grid. But if these upgrades do deliver on track compared to Alpine for the rest of the 2023 season, then they can be confident for 2024 by using these upgrades as a solid foundation to then evolve further for next year. Although it could be said that once the final upgrades arrive in Hungary in late July, it shows McLaren have already had time developing next year's car. However, it would be unfair to perceive these upgrades as anything negative. Yes, they arguably should never have had to make such drastic changes to their car so late in the season, but it's clear they aren't alone in this, with many teams struggling to wrap their head around the new regulations. But as I mentioned, it is good to see McLaren acknowledge their shortfalls and actually make bold decisions to try and turn things around. They are in an unpredictable time with a new team principal and new technical directors. But as we've seen in the past few years, if they can get their car in the correct sweet spot, then they can be a serious threat.